Hello everyone. Good to see you all. I'm Denise, in case you don't know me. I think we've got a few newcomers here. It's good to be with you. I'm not sure, but I think I may have been an unusual child. It's a bit difficult to tell, isn't it? Like when you're a child, because you only really remember what it was like to be you from the inside and you're not quite sure what you looked like from the outside. But anyway, one of my hobbies was bee catching. We had so many bees flying around on our front lawn all over the clover, and I really loved watching them up close. You know, their little pollen sacs and their weird little stripy bodies. And the speed of their wings, you know, they're so fast you can't even see them. They're invisible. And you know, they don't fly away if you get close. I don't know if you've noticed that. They basically just ignore you, bees. So I spent many a happy afternoon seeing how many bees I could catch in a jam jar. It's very simple to catch 2 or 3 bees. You just sort of sidle up to them, to a bee, you know, that's on a clover, and you just calmly put the jam jar over it, you slide the lid under it, you flip the jar over, you screw the lid on, and hey presto, you got a bee in a jar. And then you sidle up to another one, you flip your jam jar over, the first bee will always fly to the top, something about the light, I guess, and then you take the lid off, you place the jar over the next bee, slide the lid under, flip it, screw the lid back on, and you got 2 bees. Well, I got very, very good at catching bees. I could easily catch like a dozen bees in a jam jar. After that, it gets a bit hard to keep the captured bees in the jam jar because they tend, when there's a lot of them in there, they tend to sort of fly down and fly out. I don't know if you've experienced this. No. I don't remember how many times I got stung by bees. It was just like a regular part of my childhood. And bee stings really hurt. They really do. Usually I got stung by accidentally stepping on a bee. And when I think back, I think in hindsight I probably should have worn shoes. That would have been a good idea. I learnt early on that you can't keep bees in a jar for very long. It's very fun to watch them buzzing around in there, but if you leave them overnight, you'll have a jar full of dead bees the next morning. And that made me sad. So I learnt to catch as many as I could, watch them for a while in the jar, and then just like take the lid off and let them go. Fly, be free. The word for forgiveness, the Greek word for forgiveness, is a very interesting word. The noun that gets translated as forgiveness is aphesis, and the verb to forgive is aphiemi. But these words, they can be translated with lots of other English words too. So this doesn't just mean to forgive. And it kind of depends on the context as how you translate it. Because words aren't like Lego blocks that stay exactly the same size and the same colour no matter what you do with them. Meaning changes with context. And you know this, right? Like the word run. Tell me what the word run means. Give me an definition.
Faster walking.
Faster walking, yes. Okay, so walking like really fast. So that is definitely a definition of run. So yeah, moving quickly. But you know, you can run a business meeting. Your computer runs programs, a tap runs, time runs out. You can use the word run in like 17 different ways. It's the same word, but it means different things depending on the context. And if we share the same culture and the same language, I don't even have to explain what I mean when I use that word. If I say, that I left the tap running, I don't have to say, and when I say I left the tap running, I mean that the water was coming out through the metal spout, moving in a downward direction towards the ground. I don't need to explain that, you just know. And you make a mistake, though, if you take the meaning of a word in one context and try to apply exactly that same meaning in a different context. And yet, all the uses of this word run have this underlying sense of movement, right? Like there's not really any way you can use the word run where it doesn't have some sort of sense of progression in some sort of linear direction. And so that's kind of the essence of the word, it's progression or movement in a direction. So, aphiemi, the word that can be translated as to forgive, it can mean, oh gosh, I should have made those bigger, shouldn't I? It can mean to release someone or something, to dismiss them or send them away. I'm releasing you, I'm letting you go. Class dismissed. It's the word that can be translated to divorce in some context, because if you divorce someone, you're releasing them from their bond to you or their contract to you. You're sending them away and they are now free to leave. It can mean to release someone from a legal or moral obligation or consequence. So when we talk about a debt that's been owed, aphiemi means to cancel the debt, to pardon the debt, to wipe it out so that it's no longer on the books anymore. In fact, we even use the term forgive the debt, don't we? So you've done something to me, you now owe something to me, you're indebted to me, but I decide to write that off as a loss. You no longer owe me anymore. I've cancelled the debt. It's a word that's also used to mean to leave something behind, with the sense that it doesn't really concern you anymore. So you might leave a job. So you leave a job, that's kind of done now, and now you're doing something else over here that doesn't really concern you anymore. Or you might come home with mud on your shoes and leave them at the door. You just sort of leave them there and move along. You move on from what you've left behind. It's a word that can also be used when you want to communicate a sense of distance, so that there's sort of a margin of freedom in the sense of allowing someone to do something. So I might say, I'll leave it to you to tell them. You see how that sort of gives you freedom? You get to decide what words to use, when and how to tell him, because I'm leaving that to you. So all of this one word can mean all of these different things, just like run can mean lots of different things. There's another one too. It can mean to permit or allow. Let me remove that speck from your eye, Jesus said. It's the same word. So all that to say that the underlying sense of the word that we sometimes translate as to forgive has this sense of releasing, of letting go instead of holding on, a sense of creating distance, of leaving something behind and moving on. It's what I do when I let the bees out of the jar. I let them go. Oh. They fly away out of my jar. I've been thinking about forgiveness a lot this week. If you were here last week, I talked about forgiveness in quite a different way. And so I've been thinking a lot about it this week. And I just keep coming back to the bees. There's something about human nature, I think, that leads us to want to control others. We want people to do what we want them to do and be who we want them to be. I don't know if you can relate to that. Sometimes that's expressed in very obvious and overt ways. You must be what I want you to be and do what I want you to do. Actually, Putin comes to mind. It's also behind domestic violence, isn't it? trying to get someone to do and to be what we want them to do and to be, and using whatever force is necessary to make that happen. You must be what I want you to be. Stay in this jar so that I can carry you around with me wherever I go. More often, the need for control, I think, is expressed probably in more subtle ways. Like, they're the extremes, but, you know, emotional manipulation, engineering situations, adjusting our own behaviour in an attempt to adjust somebody else's behaviour. We all do it, don't we? We learnt how to do this the day that we were born. If we cry, hey, someone will come and pick us up and feed us and hold us, give us the security that we long for. We learn it from day one. If we're nice to people, they'll be our friends. It's just how life works. If you're cooperative and helpful, well, sometimes you get what you want. If you create problems and dramas for people, well, sometimes you get what you want. Sometimes you don't. If you perform well, you might get a pay rise. If you threaten litigation at your work, you probably won't get sacked, but you might not ever get hired again either. So we all attempt to control people and control our environment through how we behave. And ideally we do that in ways that isn't damaging to people. We do it by negotiating for what we want, at the same time as taking into consideration what other people want. And that, you know, that's a good thing. Commitment plays a part in this too, because any relationship involves a degree of commitment, doesn't it? I expect certain things from other people, like that the person at the checkout will charge me the correct amount. I expect that for my groceries. And they expect certain things from me that I will pay without walking out with my groceries. The more intimate the relationship, the more commitment is required to sustain it. You give commitment and you expect commitment in a relationship. But forgiveness is something else entirely. Sometimes forgiveness is letting go of the need to control another person. It's letting go of the longing that you have for life to be how you want it to be, to have someone else fill your needs in the way that you think they should be filled. Sometimes forgiveness involves putting down your longings and walking away, moving on from something that you desperately wanted. Sometimes forgiveness means releasing another person from your expectations of them. They are who they are and you can't change them. You don't have control over them. You just let them be free to be who they are, even if it's not who you think they should be, even if you don't like who they are. And as I said last week, that doesn't mean leaving yourself unprotected, open to the damage that somebody else might do to you. Setting someone free through forgiveness might go hand in hand with setting up boundaries to prevent them returning. Or it might go hand in hand with being open to negotiating a new relationship. And also, as I said last week, the ultimate goal of forgiveness is reconciliation. But that can only happen if there are changes in both parties. If there's only change in one, then you might have to figure out how to let go, how to take a stance of forgiveness and move on. Sometimes you have to forgive yourself. Release yourself from your own expectations of who you should be. Forgive yourself for not being the person that you just tried so hard to be, hope to be, strive to be. Let go of the life that you thought you should be able to achieve for yourself and accept the life that you have. Accept the person that you are, with all your flaws and all your faults. Accept the mistakes that you've made, the bad decisions that you've made, and allow yourself the freedom to not be perfect. Forgive yourself, knowing that that's what God has done for you. Because when God forgives us, he frees us. He breaks the shackles of sin and lets us go. God's freedom gives us the space, the room, the freedom to be who we are. He takes the lid off the jar and lets us go free. I think sometimes we might find ourselves having to forgive God. You may have very clear concepts of who God is, who God needs to be, who you want God to be, who God should be, and what God should be doing. And God doesn't live up to your expectations. God refuses to. God didn't protect you from tragedy, didn't arrange for you to get that job, didn't heal you, didn't give you the relationship that you wanted. You just can't control God. You can't make God do what you want. You just have to let God be God. You have to take the lid off the jar that you've stuffed God into and let God fly free. Because the thing is, if God fits inside your jar, I think that's a fake God you've got trapped in there. Because the true God won't fit inside a jar. Forgiving the God you thought you could control just might lead to reconciliation with the God who is much more real. When my son Matt was 5, he was invited to a birthday party at a local park. He had a very good time. For some reason we had to leave early. Can't remember why, but he did not want to leave. He was just having too much fun with his friends. Well, I tried the usual. Okay, 5 minutes, and we have to leave. 2 minutes, and then you need to say goodbye. Well, he's a stubborn boy. And he said, I'm not leaving. I'm not leaving unless, and I saw him look around frantically, trying to think of something that could never happen. I'm not leaving unless, well, we were standing next to a bush. It had hundreds of bees buzzing around its flowers. He said, unless you touch a bee. He thought he had me. No one would touch a bee. He had no idea who he was dealing with. I am the bee master. I considered the wisdom of, for a moment, this would set a bad parenting precedent. But you know what? Mothers will do anything to get their kid in the car without an enormous tantrum. So I walked over to the bush, I chose a bee, and I reached out and I touched that bee. Just the gentlest little touch. And that bee hardly even noticed. They are weird bees. You've got to try this. It just went on doing whatever it is that bees do, just buzzing around the flower. And I looked around to see Matt's eyes just wide open. His mother had touched a bee, and I feel like there was a new respect in his eyes. Although that may have been wishful thinking. His friend Ariel was there, and she looked stunned. She immediately ran off, shouting, Matt's mum touched a bee! And soon I had this whole clutch of small children gathered around me, begging me, touch another bee, Matt's mum, touch another bee. Well, I remembered that story a few years ago because he's a lot older than 5 now. I was walking around the lake near our house. It was a spring day and there were some busy bees buzzing around the bushes. And I went over and I touched a bee. And I do this now on a semi-regular basis. because there is something about touching, just gently touching a bee without having to catch it and put it in a jar. There's something about the beauty of touching another living creature without trying to control it, just letting it go on being who it is. So, forgiveness.